The courtroom was unlike anything Jack Morrison had ever seen. The walls looked like they were made of pure crystal, and they hummed with a soft musical sound. Strange lights floated around the ceiling, and the air itself seemed to shimmer. Jack tried not to stare, but it was hard. 3 months ago he was just hauling cargo between Earth colonies. Now he was sitting in a galactic court, facing charges he still didn't understand. Judge Zixathala towered over the courtroom like a living mountain of crystal. The alien judge was 12 feet tall and sparkled with inner light. When they spoke, their voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Jack had to listen carefully to understand the translator device clipped to his ear. The defendant, Jack Morrison, stands accused of aggressive negotiation tactics, Judge Zixathala announced. The complainants from Zephyr Prime claim severe psychological damage from the encounter. Jack looked around the packed courtroom. Dozens of different alien species filled the seats. Some looked like walking trees, others like floating jellyfish. A few resembled giant insects with too many eyes. They all stared at him like he was some kind of dangerous animal. His lawyer, Kate Phillips, sat beside him in her crisp business suit. She was one of only 12 human lawyers certified to practice galactic law. Kate had warned him that this case would set a precedent for all future human trials. But Jack still couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Your Honor," Kate said, standing up slowly and carefully. "My client was simply conducting normal business negotiations." He raised his voice slightly and used standard hand gestures. "These are common human practices." The Zephyrian prosecutor floated near the witness stand. The alien looked like a giant soap bubble filled with swirling colors. When it spoke, the translator made its voice sound like whispered music. The defendant's actions were barbaric, the prosecutor said. He produced sound waves at dangerous levels. His limb movements created threatening air disturbances. 3 of our citizens are still receiving treatment for trauma-induced resonance displacement. Jack shook his head. This was crazy. All he had done was try to get a fair price for shipping their goods. The Zephyrians had offered him half the standard rate, claiming humans were too new to space travel to deserve full payment. Jack had raised his voice a little and waved his hands to make his point. That was it. "Let me understand this correctly," Judge Zixathala said, their crystalline form shifting colors as they thought. The defendant increased his vocal output and moved his appendages during negotiations. "Yes, Your Honor," Kate replied, "but these are normal human behaviors. We use vocal emphasis and hand gestures to communicate. There was no intent to harm or threaten." "Intent is irrelevant," the Zephyrian prosecutor whispered. "The damage was done. Our people communicate through subsonic vibrations." The defendant's crude sound production was like being attacked with a sonic weapon. Jack felt his frustration building. He had worked hard to build a good reputation as a cargo hauler. He was honest, reliable, and fair. Now these aliens were making him sound like some kind of monster. The trial continued for hours. Witness after witness took the stand to describe Jack's terrifying display of aggression. One Zephyrian claimed that Jack's hand movements had created violent air currents that disrupted their delicate sensory organs. Another said his raised voice had caused severe acoustic trauma that left them unable to communicate properly for days. Jack listened to it all with growing disbelief. These aliens were describing a completely different event than what he remembered. To him, it had been a simple business disagreement. To them, it sounded like he had launched a military assault. Kate did her best to defend him. She presented evidence of normal human behavior patterns and expert testimony about Earth cultural practices. She explained that humans evolved on a world where loud sounds and sudden movements were necessary for survival. She argued that what the Zephyrians perceived as aggression was simply how humans naturally existed. But Jack could see that the judge was troubled. Every time Kate mentioned human evolutionary traits, Judge Zixathala's crystal form would darken slightly. The other aliens in the courtroom shifted nervously whenever she described typical human actions. As the day wore on, Jack's patience began to wear thin. He had been sitting still for hours, trying to be respectful of alien customs he didn't understand. His back ached from the strange chair designed for beings without human spines. His legs were cramped from sitting in one position. Worst of all, he felt like no one was listening to his side of the story. The Zephyrian prosecutor was describing Jack's handshake as a crushing display of physical dominance when Jack finally had enough. He couldn't take it anymore. This was ridiculous. All he had done was try to do business fairly, and now they were talking about him like he was some kind of savage. Jack stood up quickly, his chair scraping loudly against the crystal floor as he pushed it back. The effect was immediate and devastating. The sound of the chair scraping echoed through the crystal courtroom like thunder. The walls began to vibrate, picking up the sound and amplifying it into a deep, resonating hum. Judge Zixathala's towering form started to shake violently. "No!" Kate shouted, but it was too late. Hairline cracks appeared across Judge Zixathala's crystal surface, spreading like spiderwebs through their transparent body. The alien judge let out a sound like breaking glass as they struggled to maintain their form. The Zephyrian witnesses collapsed. Their bubble-like bodies flattened against the floor as they went into what looked like shock. Several other aliens fled the courtroom in panic. A group of tree-like beings uprooted themselves and shuffled toward the exits as fast as their root systems could carry them. The floating jellyfish aliens pulsed bright red and shot upward toward the ceiling. Security alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights bathed everything in harsh blue light. "I'm sorry," Jack called out, but his voice only made things worse. Judge Zixathala's cracks spread deeper, and more aliens fled the courtroom. Kate grabbed Jack's arm and pulled him down into his seat. "Don't move," she hissed. "Don't speak. Don't even breathe loudly." Emergency medical teams rushed into the courtroom. Beings in protective suits surrounded Judge Zixathala, spraying their crystal form with some kind of stabilizing foam. Other medics attended to the collapsed Zephyrians who were making soft whimpering sounds like deflating balloons. Jack sat frozen in his chair, afraid to move a muscle. He watched in horror as the medical team worked to prevent Judge Zixathala from completely shattering. The judge's inner light flickered weakly as they fought to maintain structural integrity. It took 20 minutes to stabilize the courtroom. When the emergency teams finally cleared out, Judge Zixathala remained standing, but their once perfect crystal form was now covered in visible cracks. They looked like a broken window that had somehow managed not to fall apart. "This court," Judge Zixathala said in a voice like grinding glass, "is in indefinite recess." The remaining aliens filed out of the courtroom in silence, giving Jack a wide berth. Some of them were still trembling. Others kept looking back at him like he might explode at any moment. Kate packed her papers quickly, her hands shaking slightly. "We need to go," she said quietly. "Now." As they left the courtroom, Jack could hear aliens in the hallway talking in hushed tones. His translator picked up fragments of their conversations. Words like dangerous, unstable, and environmental hazard kept coming up. Jack Morrison had come to court to defend himself against charges of aggressive behavior. Instead, he had accidentally proved their point in the most dramatic way possible. As news of the incident spread throughout the galactic community, it would become known as the Morrison Resonance, the day a human nearly destroyed a judge simply by standing up. The precedent was set. From that day forward, no alien judge would agree to handle a case involving humans without serious protection. Lisa Chen stepped off the transport shuttle and looked around the galactic tribunal station with professional eyes. 6 months had passed since the Morrison incident, and the insurance company she worked for wanted answers. The repair bills were stacking up, and someone needed to figure out exactly what was going on with these human court cases. Lisa had been an insurance investigator for 15 years, but she had never seen damage reports like the ones crossing her desk. Courtroom repairs, medical bills for traumatized witnesses, and something called psychological resonance therapy that cost more than most people made in a year. The Morrison case alone had generated claims worth 847,000 galactic standard credits. The station manager who met her was a nervous little alien that looked like a cross between a mushroom and a telephone pole. His name was Piptor, and he kept wringing his tentacle-like arms as he talked. "Miss Chen," Piptor said through his translator, "we are so grateful you could come. The situation has become quite complicated since the Morrison event." Lisa followed him through the station's corridors, noting the new warning signs posted everywhere. "Caution, human presence possible, and sound dampening zone active. were written in dozens of alien languages. She also noticed that several areas had been marked as structural repair in progress. The damage from the Morrison case was extensive, Piptor explained as they walked. Judge Zixathala required complete crystal matrix restructuring. The acoustic dampening systems in courtroom Delta 7 had to be rebuilt from scratch. And then there were the witness medical bills. They stopped at a large window overlooking courtroom Delta 7. Lisa could see construction crews working inside, installing what looked like massive sound-absorbing panels on every surface. The workers all wore protective gear and moved very carefully, as if they were handling dangerous materials. But Morrison wasn't the only incident, Piptor continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. There have been others. Many others. He led Lisa to a small office filled with filing cabinets and computer screens. The walls were covered with incident reports, damage assessments, and medical records. Lisa had seen organized chaos before, but this was something else entirely. Show me the files, Lisa said, sitting down at the desk. Piptor pulled out a thick folder marked Human Incident Class 3, Confidential. Inside were dozens of reports, each more bizarre than the last. Lisa started reading and quickly realized that Jack Morrison's case was just the beginning. The first report was about a farmer named Danny Rogers who had been charged with improper crop rotation on an agricultural station. During his testimony, Rogers had laughed at something his lawyer said. The sound had caused Judge Harmonic, a member of the melodic species, to enter a catatonic state that lasted 3 weeks. The judge's people communicated through pure musical tones, and Rogers' laughter had apparently been the equivalent of screaming profanity at the top of his lungs. Rogers was just nervous, Lisa muttered, reading the report. People laugh when they're nervous. The next case was even worse. A mechanic named Amy Foster had been waiting for her trial to begin when she cracked her knuckles. The sound had sent Judge Velthanor of the Sensory Acute Coalition into what the medical report described as acute sensory overload syndrome. The judge was still receiving treatment 6 months later and had filed a formal complaint with the Galactic Council claiming that humans should be classified as walking weapons of mass disturbance. Lisa flipped through more reports. There was construction worker Pete Jackson, whose yawn during jury selection had caused 3 different species to flee the courtroom. Trader Susan Murphy had triggered a diplomatic crisis simply by clearing her throat. And then there was the case that made Lisa's blood run cold. Bob Martinez had been on trial for a minor safety violation on an orbital platform. The charges were routine: failure to properly secure a tool belt during EVA work. It should have been a simple case with a small fine. Instead, it had become what the files called the fragmentation event. Martinez had been sitting quietly in the defendant's chair when he sneezed. Just sneezed. Lisa had read the acoustic analysis report 3 times, but she still couldn't believe it. Martinez's sneeze had produced a sound wave that measured 78 decibels, completely normal for a human, but devastating for Judge Yathkala of the vibrational sensitive courts. The judge, whose species existed as a single entity made up of perfectly synchronized vibrations, had literally come apart. The sneeze had disrupted their harmonic pattern so badly that they had split into 17 separate fragments, each now existing as an independent being. 17 different entities, Lisa said out loud, staring at the report. All of them need individual therapy sessions. The legal implications were staggering. Was Judge Yathkala still one person or 17? Could they still serve as a judge? Who was responsible for their medical care? The case had spawned 3 subcommittees, 2 academic papers, and a complete review of judicial continuity laws. Piptor nodded sadly. The philosophical questions alone have kept our legal scholars busy for months. Some of the fragments want to return to their original form, others prefer their new independence. Fragment number 7 has even filed a lawsuit against the other. Fragments for emotional distress. Lisa kept reading. The patterns were clear and terrifying. Every single human defendant had caused some kind of incident simply by existing. They didn't mean to cause damage. They weren't trying to hurt anyone. They were just being human, and that was apparently too much for the rest of the galaxy to handle. The financial impact was enormous. Insurance rates for human cases had increased by 300–400% in the past year. Several major insurance companies had stopped covering human-related incidents entirely. Worse, Lisa discovered that multiple alien species were lobbying to have humans classified as environmental hazards rather than sentient beings deserving legal protection. If that happens, Lisa realized, humans would lose access to galactic courts entirely. She found more evidence of the growing crisis in the confidential memos between tribunal administrators. One memo from the chief administrative officer was particularly disturbing. Recommendation: suspend all human legal proceedings pending development of adequate safety protocols. Current risk exposure is unacceptable. Another memo discussed the possibility of building specialized containment facilities for human defendants. The proposed designs looked more like hazardous waste storage than courtrooms. Lisa's investigation led her to the most devastating case of all. Judge Morthek of the gas giant courts had been one of the most respected legal minds in the galaxy. Their career had spanned over 2 centuries, and they had handled some of the most complex interspecies disputes in galactic history. Then they had presided over the case of Rick Peterson. Peterson had been a cargo trader charged with improper manifesting. Basically, he had filled out his paperwork wrong. It was a minor violation that should have resulted in a small fine and a warning. Instead, it had ended Judge Morthek's career. The incident had happened during the reading of the charges. Peterson, confused by the complex legal language, had shrugged. Just shrugged his shoulders the way humans do when they don't understand something. Judge Morthek's gaseous form had been scattered across 3 courtrooms by the air displacement from Peterson's gesture. It had taken emergency containment teams 47 minutes to reassemble the judge, and even then, they hadn't gotten all the pieces back in the right order. Lisa found the retirement letter Judge Morthek had filed the next day. It was brief, and to the point. I can no longer safely perform my duties. The risk of further fragmentation due to exposure to solid-state beings is too great. I hereby retire from all legal proceedings effective immediately. The letter was signed by all 43 separate consciousness fragments that now made up Judge Morthek's collective mind. As Lisa finished reading the files, she realized the full scope of the crisis. The Galactic Tribunal was facing a complete breakdown of interspecies law. If they couldn't safely prosecute humans, it would create a dangerous precedent that could destabilize the entire galactic legal system. Humans weren't trying to be destructive. They were just too much for the universe to handle safely. Their every action, from breathing to blinking, generated what other species perceived as environmental hostility. They were apex predators from a death world, and it showed in ways they never even realized. Lisa closed the last file and looked at Piptor, who had been waiting patiently while she read. "We need a solution," she said, "because if we don't find one soon, humans are going to find themselves outside the protection of galactic law entirely." Piptor's tentacles drooped with worry. "The tribunal has already formed an emergency committee to address the problem. They're calling it the Committee of Solutions." Lisa gathered up the files and prepared to write her report. The insurance company wouldn't like what she had to tell them, but they needed to know the truth. Humans weren't just high-risk clients. They were accidentally reshaping the entire concept of galactic justice simply by showing up to court. The emergency committee meeting room looked like something from a science fiction movie. 12 different alien species sat around a circular table that could adjust its shape and atmosphere for each participant. Some members floated in special gas chambers, others sat in pools of liquid, and a few required complete environmental suits just to survive in the same space as the others. Committee chair being Veltara existed as a floating consciousness from the Thought Space Collective. They had no physical form, appearing only as a shimmering distortion in the air above the table. When they spoke, their words appeared directly in everyone's minds, rather than through sound. "We are here to solve the human problem," Veltara announced, telepathically. "Our legal system faces collapse if we cannot find a way to safely process human defendants." Dr. Clicks from the Harmonic Unity sat inside a sound-dampening shell that looked like a giant egg. Their species communicated through musical tones so delicate that normal conversation felt like being hit with hammers. Even with the protective shell, Dr. Klix flinched whenever other committee members spoke too loudly. Representative Zorhan from the crystalline courts bore visible scars from the Morrison incident. Hairline cracks ran through their transparent body like lightning frozen in crystal. They had insisted on joining the committee despite medical advice to rest for another 6 months. Judge Yithmora from the pressure-sensitive consortium wore a specialized environmental suit that looked like a diving outfit crossed with a spacesuit. Their species lived in high-pressure environments, and normal atmospheric conditions would literally cause them to explode. The suit made soft hissing sounds as it regulated pressure levels. The other committee members represented equally sensitive species. There was Harmonizer Quintel, whose people experienced sound as physical touch. Commander Soft Whisper from the Silence Coalition, who found any noise above a whisper to be agonizing. And Elder Branch Weaver from the Rooted Assembly, whose tree-like form swayed nervously at even the thought of sudden movements. The statistics are alarming, Veltara continued, sharing data directly into their minds. Human court cases have a 100% incident rate. Every single human defendant has caused some form of trauma or damage simply by attending their trial. Representative Zorhan's crystal form darkened as they spoke. The Morrison case nearly shattered me completely. And he wasn't even trying to cause harm, he simply stood up from his chair. That's precisely the problem, Dr. Klix said from within their protective shell. Humans don't realize they're dangerous. To them, these are normal behaviors. The committee had been meeting for 3 days and they were no closer to a solution. Every suggestion they made ran into the same fundamental problem. Humans couldn't stop being human. They breathed loudly, moved suddenly, made noise, and generated vibrations just by existing. We could require all human defendants to remain sedated during trials, suggested Judge Yithmora, their voice crackling through the suit's communication system. That violates basic sentient rights, Veltara replied. A defendant must be conscious and aware during legal proceedings. What about remote testimony? Offered Commander Soft Whisper in barely audible tones. Keep the humans on their ships project their image into the courtroom. Elder Branch Weaver's leaves rustled as they considered this. The connection could fail. And what if they move or make noise during transmission? The vibrations could still reach us through the communication systems. The committee spent hours discussing containment options, soundproof booths, force fields, complete environmental isolation. Every solution created new problems. If they isolated humans too much, it violated their rights to participate in their own defense. If they didn't isolate them enough, disaster was inevitable. The breakthrough moment came when human legal observer Rachel Torres arrived to provide input on human behavioral patterns. The committee had requested human consultation, but none of them had fully considered what that would mean. Rachel entered the meeting room wearing a simple business suit and carrying a briefcase. She looked around at the assembled aliens with professional interest, unaware that her mere presence was causing panic among several committee members. "Good morning, everyone," Rachel said cheerfully. "Thank you for including me in these discussions." The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Dr. Klix's protective shell slammed shut with an audible clang as they retreated into emergency isolation mode. The shell began playing soothing harmonics to counteract the acoustic assault of Rachel's greeting. Judge Yithmora's pressure suit activated emergency containment protocols. Red warning lights flashed across their helmet as the suit interpreted Rachel's voice as a pressure wave that could cause structural damage. Commander Soft Whisper collapsed backwards in their chair, overwhelmed by sound levels they experienced as physical violence. Their assistant rushed forward with emergency silence generators. Elder Branch Weaver's entire tree form began to shake, their leaves falling like snow as they entered defensive hibernation mode. Their root system tried to dig into the floor, seeking escape from the perceived threat. Even Representative Zorhan's crystal form began to resonate dangerously, the cracks from the Morrison incident spreading slightly as Rachel's voice echoed through their structure. Rachel stood frozen in the doorway, watching the chaos unfold around her. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, But even her whispered apology caused Dr. Clix's shell to emit distressed musical notes. Veltara, as the only committee member unaffected by physical sensations, took control of the situation. Miss Torres, please, remain completely still and silent. Medical teams are responding. It took 45 minutes to stabilize the committee members. Dr. Clix required harmonic therapy to recover from the acoustic trauma. Judge Ythmora needed pressure recalibration. Commander Soft Whisper had to be placed in a complete silence chamber for 2 hours. When the committee finally reconvened, Rachel participated through a specially constructed communication system that filtered and dampened all human-generated sounds. Even then, several members remained in protective mode. This demonstrates our fundamental challenge, Veltara observed. Miss Torres used a standard greeting that humans consider polite and friendly, yet it caused more damage than some military sonic weapons. Rachel, speaking through the filtered system, tried to explain human nature. We evolved on a dangerous world. Everything on Earth was trying to kill us, so we had to be loud and aggressive to survive. What you see as threatening behavior is just how we naturally exist. But surely humans can control these behaviors, Representative Zorhan said hopefully. You can choose to move more slowly, speak more quietly. We can try, Rachel admitted. But it's like asking you to stop being made of crystal. Our bodies generate vibrations when we breathe, when our hearts beat, when we blink. We can't turn off being human. The committee spent the next week developing what would become known as the Human Interaction Protocols. They designed sound-dampening fields strong enough to contain a small explosion. They created vibration isolation chambers that could prevent human movements from affecting sensitive species. They developed emotional dampening screens to protect aliens from human aggression indicators like eye contact and facial expressions. The breakthrough came when engineer Steve Parker was called in to consult on containment solutions. Steve was a specialist in hazardous materials handling, and the committee hoped his expertise might help with the human problem. Steve arrived prepared to discuss technical solutions. He had studied the incident reports and understood the challenges. What he didn't understand was that he himself would become a demonstration of the problem's scope. The key is understanding what makes humans dangerous, Steve explained, gesturing normally with his hands as he spoke. We need to think of every human as a walking environmental hazard. His hand movements created air currents that the committee members experienced as violent weather patterns. Representative Zorhan's cracks began to spread again. Dr. Clix retreated into their shell. Judge Ythmora's suit began emergency pressure adjustments. But Steve wasn't finished. As he warmed to his subject, he began moving more enthusiastically. For example, when a human walks, each footstep generates vibrations. When we talk, we create sound waves. Even our breathing produces air displacement that can affect sensitive species. Elder Branch Weaver began shedding leaves rapidly, their stress response triggered by Steve's animated explanation. Commander Soft Whisper had already evacuated the room. And then disaster struck. Steve, reaching for a diagram to illustrate his point, accidentally knocked over his water glass. The sound of glass hitting the table caused 3 committee members to require immediate medical attention. Dr. Clix's shell cracked slightly. Judge Ythmora's pressure suit inflated to emergency levels. And most dramatically, Harmonizer Quintel spontaneously reproduced their stress response, creating 17 new offspring that immediately began crying for their parent, committee. Chair being Veltara, observing from a safe distance through quantum-encrypted thought transmission, finally understood the true scope of the problem. Humans didn't just behave aggressively by galactic standards. They existed aggressively. Every human action, from breathing to blinking, generated what other species perceived as environmental hostility. Chief Bailiff Thurok stood 8 feet tall and weighed 600 pounds. His natural armor plating was thick enough to stop small explosions and strong enough to handle heavy machinery. His people, the Defensive Guild, had evolved on a world where the ground shook constantly and the air itself could kill most other species. They were built to survive anything. That made them perfect for the job nobody else wanted. The contract from the Galactic Tribunal had been unlike anything Thurok had seen in his 40 years of security work. Most jobs involve protecting important people from assassins or stopping fights between drunk spacers. This job was different. This job was about protecting an entire courtroom from a single human defendant. Thurok read the contract again as his transport approached the tribunal station. The payment was enormous, more than he usually made in a year. The hazard pay alone was triple the normal rate. But the requirements were strange. He needed to wear full environmental protection gear, carry emergency medical supplies for 12 different species, and maintain constant acoustic dampening around any human defendant. The strangest requirement was the last one. Bailiff must be prepared to physically restrain defendant without causing panic among court personnel or witnesses. Captain Ellen Hayes was already waiting in the holding area when Thurok arrived. She sat on a specially reinforced bench designed to contain the vibrations from human movement. The holding area itself looked more like a medical quarantine facility than a normal jail cell. Hayes was a cargo ship captain charged with violations of interstellar shipping regulations. She had failed to properly declare a cargo of Earth spices, claiming she didn't know that cinnamon was considered a controlled substance by the Aromatic Sensitivity Coalition. It was a minor violation that normally resulted in a small fine, but her case had become a test of the new human protocols. "You must be my babysitter," Hayes said when Thurok entered the holding area. Thurok's translator converted his rumbling voice into something Hayes could understand. "I am Chief Bailiff Thurok. I will be ensuring your safety and the safety of others during your trial." Hayes looked him up and down, taking in his massive armored form and the array of protective equipment he carried. "All this for a paperwork violation? You'd think I was planning to blow up the station." "In a way," Thurok said carefully, "you are more dangerous than a bomb." He had studied the human incident files during his journey to the station. The reports made fascinating and terrifying reading. Humans were walking disasters who didn't even know they were causing damage. Their every action was interpreted as aggressive by other species, even when they were trying to be friendly. The specially constructed Courtroom Omega was a marvel of protective engineering. The walls were reinforced with shock-absorbing materials that could contain a small explosion. Atmospheric isolation systems prevented human-generated air disturbances from reaching sensitive species. Triple-layer containment fields created multiple barriers between the defendant and the rest of the courtroom. Judge Quarinth presided from behind the most elaborate protective system Thurok had ever seen. The judge was a methane-based entity who existed as a cloud of sentient gas. They sat inside a sealed chamber that looked like a giant fishbowl, communicating through quantum resonance to avoid any direct acoustic contact. The witness stand was surrounded by emergency containment equipment. The jury box had been replaced, with individual isolation pods for each alien juror. Even the court reporter, a telepathic consortium member, worked from behind psychic shielding designed to prevent mental contamination from human thought patterns. "This is insane," Hayes whispered as Thurok led her into the courtroom. "Please speak more quietly," Thurok said, his own voice dampened by his equipment. "Your whisper registers as shouting to several species present today." Hayes looked around, at the elaborate precautions surrounding her case. Every surface was padded or reinforced. Warning lights flashed whenever she moved. The air itself seemed thick with dampening fields and protective barriers. The trial should have been simple. Hayes had made an honest mistake with her cargo manifest. Her lawyer, Patricia Adams, appeared as a holographic projection to avoid the risk of having two humans in the same room. The evidence was straightforward and the violation was minor, but nothing involving humans was ever simple. The first crisis came when Hayes entered the courtroom. Her leather boots squeaking slightly against the polished floor generated vibrations that activated 3 separate emergency protocols. Warning alarms began sounding throughout the station. Judge Quarinth's containment chamber automatically sealed itself. 2 alien witnesses immediately entered stress-induced hibernation. Thurok moved quickly, activating his personal dampening field and guiding Hayes to the specially designed defendant chair. The chair was bolted to the floor and surrounded by vibration absorbers, but even sitting down caused minor tremors that made several aliens flinch. "Is everyone always this jumpy?" Hayes asked, bewildered by the reaction her simple entrance had caused. To them, you just announced your presence like a military assault, Thurok explained quietly. Your footsteps registered as seismic activity. The sound of your clothing moving was interpreted as aggressive territorial marking. The trial proceeded with Thurok serving as intermediary for all human interactions. When Hayes needed to speak, he relayed her words through filtered communication systems that reduced the acoustic impact to tolerable levels. When she moved, he guided her through designated pathways designed to minimize environmental disruption. The absurdity reached new heights when Hayes attempted to hand evidence to the court. What should have been a simple gesture required a complex protocol involving 3 backup bailiffs, emergency containment fields, and a specialized transfer system that looked like something designed for handling radioactive materials. Hayes held up a datapad containing her shipping records. This proves I didn't know about the spice regulations. The movement of raising her arm triggered every proximity alarm in the courtroom. Judge Quaranth's chamber began emergency evacuation procedures. The crystalline court observer's form started resonating dangerously, and the pressure-sensitive jury member's environmental suit inflated to maximum protection levels. Thurok activated his emergency protocols surrounding Hayes with a portable containment field, while backup bailiffs secured the evidence transfer. It took 15 minutes to safely move the datapad from Hayes to the court clerk, a process that normally took 15 seconds. I just wanted to show them my paperwork, Hayes said, completely confused by the elaborate response to her simple gesture. Your paperwork movement created air displacement equivalent to a small windstorm, Thurok explained. The light reflecting off the datapad was interpreted as aggressive display behavior by 3 different species. Despite the elaborate precautions, the trial was proceeding smoothly until Hayes's lawyer arrived. David Miller had been delayed by transport problems and rushed into the courtroom 20 minutes late. He had no idea that his hurried entrance would nearly cause a diplomatic incident. Miller burst through the courtroom doors, breathing heavily from running through the station corridors. His hurried footsteps echoed through the chamber like artillery fire. His heavy breathing sounded like an industrial ventilation system to the sensitive alien hearing. The effect was catastrophic. Judge Quaranth's containment field fluctuated dangerously as their gaseous form reacted to the sudden acoustic assault. Emergency systems began evacuating the methane-based judge to prevent complete dispersal. The Zephyrian witnesses collapsed in what medical records would later describe as acute sonic trauma syndrome. Their bubble-like forms deflated against the floor as they went into shock. 2 treefolk observers entered stress-induced molting, their bark-like skin falling off in large chunks as they tried to protect their vulnerable inner layers. The court reporter, despite their psychic shielding, began broadcasting distress signals that affected every telepathic being within 3 decks of the courtroom. Most dramatically, the harmonic species jury member began producing emergency warning calls that shattered 2 windows in the observation gallery. Their musical distress signals triggered sympathetic resonance in the building's crystal support structures, causing minor earthquakes throughout the station. Thurok moved faster than anyone would have thought possible for someone wearing full environmental armor. He tackled Miller before the human lawyer could take another step, wrapping him in an emergency dampening field that muffled all sound and motion. Emergency containment protocols activated, Thurok announced to the panicking courtroom. Human, subject secured, beginning atmospheric stabilization procedures. It took 40 minutes to restore order to the courtroom. Medical teams treated 17 different species for various forms of human exposure trauma. Judge Quaranth required emergency reconstitution therapy to prevent their gaseous form from dispersing completely. The station's structural engineers spent 3 hours checking for damage from the harmonic resonance incident. Miller, confined within Thurok's portable containment system, could only watch in horror as the consequences of his late arrival unfolded around him. He had simply run to court because he was late. The aliens were treating it like he had detonated a bomb. 1 year had passed since the Morrison incident, and the Galactic Tribunal looked like a completely different place. Warning signs in dozens of alien languages covered every wall. Emergency medical stations were positioned throughout the complex. Most telling of all, the insurance rates posted at the main entrance now included a special category: Human Interaction Hazard Coverage, Premium Plus. Judge Kethamar stood in the observation deck looking down at Courtroom Omega Prime, the newest and most advanced human-safe legal facility in the galaxy. Their species, the Stone Mind Collective, existed as living rock formations that could survive almost anything. That made them one of the few types of beings willing to preside over human cases. The courtroom below looked more like a containment facility than a place of justice. Massive dampening fields created layers of protection between different sections. Emergency evacuation tubes were built into every wall. The air itself was filtered through 17 different systems to remove human-generated particles that might affect sensitive species. Yet somehow, justice still functioned. Today's case involved Tony Rodriguez, a mechanic from the outer colonies. He was charged with unauthorized modifications to a space station's life support system. The charges were serious but not uncommon. Humans had a habit of fixing things that other species thought worked fine already. Rodriguez sat in the specially designed isolation booth that had become standard for human defendants. The booth was soundproof, vibration-proof, and equipped with its own life support system to prevent any human-generated environmental effects from reaching the rest of the courtroom. His lawyer, Patricia Adams, appeared as a holographic projection from a secure facility 3 stations away. After the Miller incident, no one was taking chances with multiple humans in the same legal space. "Your Honor," Patricia said through the quantum-filtered communication system, "my client's modifications to the life support system were made with good intentions. He saw inefficiencies and tried to help." Judge Kethamar's stone form shifted slightly as they considered the evidence. Their species didn't experience emotion the way most beings did, which made them ideal for handling the stress of human cases. The modifications were unauthorized, the judge stated, their voice resonating through the chamber's communication systems. However, station records show they improved air recycling efficiency by 23% and reduced power consumption by 15%. The prosecution, represented by a regulatory compliance entity from the Safety First Coalition, argued their case through a heavily shielded communication link. Unauthorized modifications, regardless of their effectiveness, violate 17 different safety protocols. The trial was proceeding normally until Rodriguez sneezed. Even contained within his isolation booth, the sound triggered automatic lockdown procedures throughout the facility. Warning lights flashed as emergency systems activated. 3 separate evacuation alerts began broadcasting in different sections of the station. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Courtroom Omega Prime's sister facilities, Omega Secondary and Omega Tertiary, began emergency evacuation procedures as a precautionary measure. The sound dampening systems, designed to contain sounds equivalent to small explosions, absorbed most of the impact, but sensitive monitoring equipment still detected dangerous acoustic levels. Chief Bailiff Thurrock, now promoted to head of human safety operations, moved quickly to manage the crisis. His team of armored bailiffs activated additional containment protocols, while medical teams prepared to treat any affected aliens. "Containment holding," Thurrock announced through the emergency communication system. "Human acoustic event successfully dampened. All species report minimal exposure effects." Rodriguez, completely unaware of the chaos his sneeze had caused, continued sitting quietly in his booth. To him, it had been just a normal sneeze. To the galactic justice system, it had been a Category 2 environmental event requiring immediate response protocols. Judge Kethamar, being made of living stone, was unaffected by the acoustic disturbance. They continued the trial as if nothing had happened, though emergency systems continued flashing warning lights for another 10 minutes. "The defendant's sneeze has been contained without incident," the judge announced matter-of-factly. "Proceedings will continue." The case concluded with Rodriguez being found guilty of the safety violations. But Judge Kethamar noted that his unauthorized improvements had actually made the station safer and more efficient. The sentence reflected the complex reality of human-alien relations. Rodriguez was assigned to community service, helping design official modification protocols for human engineers. Perhaps Judge Kethamar observed. The solution is not to prevent humans from improving things, but to create proper channels for their enthusiastic approach to problem solving. After the trial, Thurrock reviewed the incident reports with his team. The sneeze had triggered emergency responses on 7 different levels of the station, required medical attention for 3 aliens with acoustic sensitivity, and generated enough paperwork to keep administrative staff busy for a week. But importantly, no one had been seriously injured, and the trial had proceeded to completion. "We're getting better at this," Thurrock told his team during their daily briefing. "A year ago, that sneeze would have hospitalized half the court and caused 3 diplomatic incidents." The training facility for armored bailiffs had become one of the busiest educational institutions in the galaxy. Beings from dozens of species came to learn how to safely interact with humans. The curriculum covered everything from acoustic dampening techniques to emergency evacuation procedures. New recruits watched archived footage of human court cases, carefully edited to remove the most traumatic incidents. The videos served as both educational tools and warnings about the challenges of human legal proceedings. "Remember," Thurrock told a group of new trainees, "humans are not malicious. They evolved on a world so dangerous that their normal behavior is aggressive by everyone else's standards. They breathe like industrial ventilators, walk like seismic events, and express emotions like natural disasters." One young recruit, a crystalline court apprentice named Shimara, raised a tentative appendage. "Instructor Thurrock, why don't humans just learn to behave differently?" Thurrock's armored form shifted as he considered the question. "Imagine if I asked you to stop being made of crystal. Could you do it?" Shimara's form flickered with confusion. "That's impossible. Crystal formation is part of my essential nature." "Exactly," Thurrock replied. "Humans are apex predators from a death world. Aggression is their essential nature. They cannot turn it off any more than you can turn off being crystalline." The training sessions included simulations of human interactions. Recruits practiced emergency containment procedures while exposed to recordings of human speech, movement, and other environmental hazards. Many washed out during the first week, unable to handle even dampened recordings of human activity. Those who completed the training joined the growing ranks of the Defensive Guild's Human Safety Division. They were the thin line between human defendants and the complete breakdown of galactic law. The success of the Armored Bailiff program had led to other innovations. Human-safe medical facilities were being built on major stations. Diplomatic quarters designed for human ambassadors included environmental controls that protected alien visitors. Even commercial establishments were developing human-friendly sections with appropriate safety measures. Captain Ellen Hayes, now serving her community service sentence, had become an unofficial consultant on human safety protocols. Her insights helped design better protective systems and communication methods. She found it amusing that her punishment for a paperwork violation had turned into a career in interspecies relations. "The irony," Hayes told Thurrock during one of their regular consultation meetings, "is that we're probably safer for other species than we've ever been. All these protective measures mean fewer accidents." Hayes was right. The incident rate for human-alien interactions had dropped significantly since the implementation of the human protocols. Aliens knew what to expect and how to protect themselves. Humans were becoming more aware of their effect on other species and taking precautions. But the cost was enormous. Every human court case required specialized facilities, trained personnel, and equipment that could handle what the insurance industry now classified as extreme environmental events. The Galactic Tribunal's budget for human-related proceedings had increased by 500%. The philosophical implications were even more complex. Some species argued that the elaborate protections were a form of discrimination against humans. Others insisted that treating humans as environmental hazards was the only way to maintain galactic civilization. The debate came to a head during Rodriguez's sentencing hearing. A group of human rights advocates had petitioned the court, arguing that the containment protocols violated basic sentient dignity. Judge Kethamar addressed the petition directly. "These protocols do not exist to punish humans or deny their rights. They exist because humans are fundamentally incompatible with standard galactic existence. Without protection, alien species cannot safely interact with humans. Without interaction, there can be no justice.